Help us to be deserving for your Sabbath blessing. And as it was in the day of Noah, so is it now. We know time is short. Help us to use these hours or this time left wisely, and give us guidance on how we should live this last time here we have on earth. And may we be servants and be with the elders as they come to give us words. In your name we praise. Amen.
I don't know if you have the notes for this presentation, but they're available. It's a Chosen Generation conclusion. I don't know that I'll get to the notes in this presentation though, but you need to have them for the rest of the day. I've been doing this presentation for some time now, and I'm only taking pieces of it here at this camp meeting. But one thing I'm going to include in it, and it will hopefully give a little bit of preparation of understanding for what Brother Theodore is going to share at the beginning of Parminder's presentation. Parminder is going to turn a little bit of time over to Theodore in the next presentation. So where I start here, if you can keep that in your mind as a point of reference, Brother Theodore was telling me earlier he might need to refer back to this, so maybe this will help you get it a couple times. I watched Brother Theodore give a certain presentation a couple times. I don't know how many exactly at different camp meetings, and it finally clicked on me, something that seemed important for what I was studying at that time, and I've been using it ever since. And it's up here, and I know this is small, but if you get the logic of it, then you'll have to come up with your device and take a picture, or get some of Theodore's notes where he has it laid out in his notes even more complete. This is a chiastic structure of Samuel Snow's history, Millerite history, and when it's in Theodore's notes, he's got much more to it, including more chiastic structures that I'm not illustrating here. What I'm illustrating up here is Samuel Snow's 4 letters that put together the message of the Midnight Cry in Millerite history. That's what this is, 1, 2, 3, 4. But when Theodore studied this out and began recognizing when these letters were written or when they were published, he recognized the chiastic structure. And so even though you couldn't probably see it from up here, this is the date that this first letter was written. And this is all 1844. So that's why all I have is 2/16, February 16th, 2/22, February 22nd. But this was written on the February 16th, so I got a little W by it for written. But it was published on the 22nd, so I got a little P by it. So with these 4 letters, this one here was published on May 2nd, 5/2. This third letter was published on June 22nd. And this was published on July 18th, okay, 3 days before midnight, July 22nd, first. But also, one of the things once you go over this a few times and it starts settling into your mind the significance of God's providence in this history, then you can even see His providence was even more restricted, because these publications were published in 2 different periodicals. One was the Signs of the Times, and one was the Midnight Cry. And they were published on a regular basis. I didn't look deep enough in my notes to remind myself. Maybe Theodore can tell me from the floor. It's like every Wednesday the Signs of the Times was published, and every Thursday the Midnight Cry was published. The point being is, when you see that the publication dates for these articles lines up with so profoundly with these biblical calendars, that you might be tempted, I know you wouldn't, but you might be tempted to say, well, they were purposely publishing them on these dates, and there's no way. This was 2 different publications, and they were locked into their publication cycle long before this particular history came into play. So the only reason I have this up here, or telling you about that, is just for the wow factor, if you finally get it, okay? So up here, when I say it's published on February 22nd, I got an ST. It was published in the Signs of the Times. And then these other 3 are all published in the Midnight Cry publication. It just, if you can, without even understanding it, if you can just get the implications of how the Lord was controlling the publications.
So on February 22nd, it was published in the Midnight Cry, and it was republished in the Signs on April 3rd, which was Pentecost, according to the rabbinic calendar.
Okay, so I have that date up here, but I left that out. And I left that out because that, although this is, there's even some dates over here that Theodore, when he would be teaching this, he would tell you about, but I'm being selective about what I'm putting in place. But I do address this. What he just said is this first article was written on February 16th, and it was first published, and you said in the Midnight Cry. I have the Signs of the Times up there. And then it was republished. Okay, so I'll do this. Midnight Cry, Signs of the Times. Now I've heard his logic, the application that he puts on these waymarks. I have a little bit different take on it, and so far he and I haven't ever had a problem with that. He usually will say, I can find the waymarks, I can put them on the line, but I need help defining what they mean. So he's not threatened by that. If you've heard his presentations and you hear me put a little bit different take on at least one point here than he would, he's probably not too threatened by it, so you shouldn't be either. So in any case, this is the first disappointment, April 19th, okay? For me, for us, that'd be 9/11. Okay, so I plugged that into this history. So what he's saying here about this first, one of the things that we understand from this first publication that was written on this date and then published on February 22nd. February 22nd in 1844 corresponds to the dedication of the temple in 515/516 BC. You've taken February 22nd, 1844, he's did his computer work on it. And so the point I want you to see is I'm dealing with these 4 publications and I'm treating them as a prophetic line. Therefore, the first waymark at the beginning of this prophetic line is the temple dedication, which I'm saying is taking place right now. That when the temple was dedicated and the ark was brought in the time of Solomon, there was a manifestation of divine power. And I'm saying that that is 2018, here and now, that this beginning of this prophecy, in this 4-step prophecy in Millerite history in the context of Samuel Snow, is predicting that at the end the temple would be dedicated. And I'm going to try showing you here today that the manifestation of the power of God that we are witnessing right here and now in this place is demonstrating that the Ark of the Covenant has just been brought into the temple. And one of the characteristics that inspiration says takes place at that time is that God's people come into unity. Okay? And the reason that God's people come into unity in this history is from the truth. Okay? So the truth now is being opened up in a way that's designed by God to produce unity among the priests that have been following this methodology up to this point in time. So it's worthy to take some time to understand that the beginning of Samuel Snow's 4 publication corresponds, the publishing of it corresponds with the dedication of the temple in 515/16 BC. But it was republished, and when it was republished on the date that if you were using the rabbinical type reckoning, that you would have identified Passover as, and you would have been wrong. Okay, the date in the Gregorian time of Millerite history that would correspond to Passover is actually over here, May 2nd. But you'd have to use the biblical reckoning time to recognize May 2nd as the Passover. But the theologians of that day and age weren't using the biblical reckoning of time. They were using the rabbinical reckoning of time. So they would tell you that Passover would have corresponded to April 3rd. And what I want you to see about that is I'm arguing that a false methodology is marked in this history before the first disappointment. Before 9/11, there is a false methodology, And if you hold to that false application of time, then you will be unable to recognize this history. Okay, because we've come to understand over the past couple of years that methodology is one of the issues. Okay, so before we get to 9/11, the first disappointment, the first day of the first month, Samuel Snow's history is marking for us here a false understanding of Passover. And what you need to understand is the Passover is the most important key for Samuel Snow to unravel October 22nd, 1844. He first has to understand exactly where Christ was crucified. And there was an argument in that day and age, and there still is in Christianity. Samuel Snow has to determine when the Passover was airtight, because that's his point of reference to ultimately extend 1810 years off into the future after AD 34 to get to 1844. You've got to be, he used the cross as his starting point. So you got to see that this false understanding of the Passover, if you would hold on to that and come to the first disappointment, if you come to 9/11 and you're going to use the methodology that's been being used in Adventism before 9/11, you will be unable to see this history. You follow the logic? Okay, so the second letter is published on May 2nd, which corresponds to Passover. And this is what became a real point of reference for me, because this is a center of a chiasm. From the writing of his first letter until the publication here on May 2nd, I have 76. Is it 77? 77. Okay, in my notes I have 2 months and 16 days, but evidently there's a way. Yeah, it's like he said, sometimes we have to learn how to count. So for those of you around the world that have been hearing me say 76, I'm now correcting that, all right? 77 days, but this is a chiastic structure that begins when his first letter, first of 4 letters, is written. The dead center of it is May 2nd, and this article was published on May 2nd in the Midnight Cry. And I didn't put it up here, but what do you suppose the article is? What's the theme of the article that's published on May 2nd, which is Passover in 1844? The midst of the week. And where do we get the expression the midst? Where did he get the expression midst of the week from? From Daniel 9. It's talking. So the subject of that article is the cross, the midst of the week. It's published on what would be the true Passover in 1844. So the reason I have this down here is that this waymark here, the second letter of Samuel Snow, you got a double chiasm going on. You've got the chiasm of the cross that we understand, but you've got this 77 days from his first letter coming to his second letter, and then 77 days later takes you to his fourth and final letter. The third letter that's published in the Midnight Cry on June 22nd is being published on what would be Pentecost in 1844. And typically we're saying that Pentecost is a symbol of organization. So I'm saying that Passover, and if you listened to Theodore's presentations here, and if you're watching online, you can go back. There was a point where he was given evidence why this May 2nd date is 2014, okay? There's abundant evidence of this in these lines. So this is 2014 right here. And I'm putting 2016 with organization just based upon this is when these issues connected with organization come into this movement. If anyone wants to wiggle that with some good information, that's fine, but I'm putting 2016 there, because it lines up with Pentecost in Samuel Snow's history, and we're repeating the history of the Millerites to the very letter. So this chiasm comes to a conclusion down here on July 18th. It's published, and the title of this final and fourth letter is Confirming the Covenant. The names, the content of these letters correspond with these waymarks, and together with the connection that they have with the biblical dates, they're given a testimony about the history that we're in right now. You follow the logic here. Okay, so the reason this, I'll tell you why I needed this, but for this presentation that I'm going to continue on with, is because I'm understanding, you know, the foundations are done by 2014, and by midnight over here, which is July 21st in Samuel Snow's history, 3 days after this fourth publication, by midnight, our probation closes. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is that foundations being finished here in the middle point of this chiasm. You follow me? This chiasm is a complete prophecy, but we're at the prophetic level that we know that if we find a prophecy that is this long and it's divided in the middle, that this prophecy from here, from the middle to here, also produces a prophetic testimony. You follow me? You got the 2520, it's a story all of its own, but when you divide it in the middle in 538, you have 1260 years of paganism trampling down the sanctuary and the host, and over here with this 1260, you got 1260 years of the papacy trampling down the sanctuary and the host. So what I'm saying is this half of the prophecy, from Passover to confirming the covenant, it's its own prophecy at one level. You can approach it. And my secondary argument is, if this prophecy begins with a double witness about the cross, and it does, because it's Passover, 1844, and the subject of the article is the midst of the week, Passover. Therefore, I'm saying there's got to be a cross down here at the end, because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. And I'm going to argue that here at midnight, that this history, which is the history of number 8, is the history of the first fruit offering, which is the history of the cross, and Jesus was the first fruit offering in the cross. And I want to be able to show this cross in here based upon Jesus illustrating the end from the beginning. That's the reason that I latched on to this work of Theodore. But I'm telling you, his is much more. He has a lot more to it. He's got not just detailed, he's got other chiasms that extend in here that I'm not showing you. Okay, so that's the purpose of that for the presentation I'm going to do. I want to get down here to this history from midnight to the midnight cry and identify that it's the number 8. And I want you to understand one of the justifications I have for putting a cross here in this history is because this is the end of this prophecy, and at the beginning you have a cross. You follow me? Okay, so the number 3 here is in agreement with, you know, I think Tabo has probably laid out more than most, but he's found several witnesses in the scriptures of what we call either the prediction before midnight or the prediction before the close of probation, that there's many times a number 3 in there. And sure enough, in this history, where this chiasm comes to an end, it comes to an end on July 18th, 3 days before July 21st, and July 21st is midnight. So based on what we've been understanding about a prediction before the close of probation, or midnight, however you want to express it, you can see that 3 days in there. And okay. Where I'm going to try to go, I'll just finish off the thought in advance so you know where I'm going to go, maybe, is that in 2 Chronicles 29, verse 16 and 17, you begin at the first day of the first month, which for us is 9/11, and it takes 8 days to cleanse the temple, and then another 8 days to cleanse the courtyard. So that took them to the 16th of the first month, and it forced them into having a second Passover, which is all right. But we begin to see from the first day of the first month to the midnight cry, based upon Ezra 7:9, first day of the first month. Then he gets to Jerusalem, which is midnight cry, Samuel Snow showing up at Exeter on August 15th. And he had the third decree with him, 10th day of the 7th month. That in the basic structure of Ezra 7:9, you have 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law. But when you start on the first day of the first month in 2 Chronicles 29, you have 8 days from 9/11 to the midnight cry, and another 8 days to the Sunday law. And I'm saying that the 8th day is not a point in time, that the 8th day is a period of time. And that the number 8 ends right there at the midnight cry. And then I'm saying there's another 8 days to get to the Sunday law, but I'm saying the Sunday law is Pentecost. And at Pentecost you have a first fruit offering. But back here you've got the first fruit offering in the spring feast. And the first fruit offering in the spring feast is the wave sheaf. And it's barley. Okay, but 50 days later, you're going to have a first fruit offering that is the 2 wave loaves that get lifted up, but they're wheat. Okay, there's a difference between the two, and they're different feasts. And so I'm here summarizing what I'm understanding in a very brief snippet of Parminder's presentations about the harvest. Okay, so here's what I mean about this little line. The reason I got a little black and blue here is I'm saying at midnight, at a point in time, probation, the harvest takes place for the priests. Period. Point in time. Foolish, wise priests, however you want to express it, they're harvested right here. And I'm saying that before the great harvest begins, which is the Levites and the Nethinims, that the wave sheaf offering has to be lifted up as a first fruit offering. I'm saying it's happening here. But when you get to the midnight cry, then becomes the harvest of the Levites, followed by the harvest of the Nethinims, and it's progressive. Where this is different. That's why I got the arrows for Levites, Nethinims, progressive. I'm not dealing with the harvest of the 144,000. It's not necessary for me to make my point. But this is progressive here for Levites and Nethinims. Their harvest is beginning here at the midnight cry for the Levites. But for you and I in this room, our harvest point in time, okay, and I'm saying in this period from here to here is where the wave sheaf is lifted up. And it's a first fruit offering, but so down here is the wave loaf, a first fruit offering, but there's a difference. This is a sheaf of barley, and this is 2 loaves of wheat. And it's not... You don't, to do this first fruit offering, you don't just go out and cut down a sheaf of wheat and offer it. You got to cut down the wheat, you got to grind it into flour, you got to bake it with leaven, and then you got to lift it up as a wave loaf offering. So what I'm saying is for this first fruit offering to take place at Pentecost, which I'm saying is the Sunday law down here in this number 8, this would be the second period of 8 in 2 Chronicles 29. There is a process of developing, if that's the right word, this first fruit offering. Unlike a singular point in time for the close of probation for the barley. Okay, you cut that down, you take it in, you lift it up before the Lord. You see, are you understanding the distinction? Yet this is, here, these wave loaves, there's 2 loaves. So if we choose to understand that these 2 loaves consist of priests and Levites at the Sunday law, that's not a problem for me. That's not a distinction that I'm trying to draw. I can acknowledge that. But there's a difference here between the close of our probation and the close of probation for the Levites. Ours is a point in time. Theirs is a progression. They will be part of a first fruit offering that's lifted up here in the time period of a number 8. And Pentecost is a number 8 also. Pentecost takes place on the 50th day after the first fruit offering, but it's 7 sevens, and so you're at day 49, which would be a 7th day. Day 50 is an 8, okay, and it's lifted up as an ensign. We've taught that for quite some time. But this too is an ensign because this is the cross. And Christ says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. So, this history here, to me, is important to put in place for this particular presentation, the logic of it. So I'll go back to this just to remind you. The reason that I appreciated this work here about Samuel Snow's 4 letters is because it gives us the chiasm of his 4 letters. The content of the letters pretty much speaks to the very history. This first letter is probably the most you can derive about that first letter that was important to the Midnight Cry, is that he recognizes it's in the fall, not in the spring. But he has a bunch of misconceptions. But still, you have a history here that contributes to our history. His understanding of the Midnight Cry is developing. It's not so much to me the details of Samuel Snow's understanding in this history as it is the dates when those publications took place, and then sometimes just the theme of the presentation, or maybe the title, Confirming the Covenant, right here. If you follow the logic, this is probably too much information for me, expect you to follow the logic, but if you're following the logic, then what I'm saying is, right here, and I've already said this is where the manifestation of the divine power is taking place in either Moses' tent tabernacle or Solomon's temple in 2018. This is where he's confirming the covenant with us. Okay, he's putting in place right at the point where the temple is being dedicated, in advance of us beginning a work as priests in this history, and also in advance of us also becoming an offering in that same history. And when Solomon brings in the Ark of the Covenant in the temple dedication in his history, and there's a manifestation of the divine power, that's what I'm marking over here on this line, that's taking place now, and I've already said it produces a unity. But to me, you're seeing the Shekinah, divinity, come into the temple in the story of Solomon. So you're seeing an illustration of the combination of humanity and divinity in this history here. And that's part of the story of this offering. Christ had to take humanity upon himself. Sister White plainly says it's impossible for divinity to die. In order for Christ to be an offering, this isn't the only reason, but in order for Christ to be an offering, he had to partake of humanity, because he has to die here. And it was not his divinity that died on the cross, it was his humanity. So in order for him to become the offering, he had to become a combination of humanity and divinity. And before we enter into this history here, midnight to the midnight cry, and begin to function as priests, we also have to become the offering. And to become the offering, you and I have to participate in the experience of the combination of humanity and divinity, because Christ is our example in all things. Okay, so that's in the manifestation of the power of God that took place in the temple. The biblical and spirit of prophecy commentary on it is that in both cases, in Moses' tabernacle and Solomon's temple, that the people were humbled and awed. They just blew their mind. But it was a humbling revelation of the manifestation of the power of God. And I'm saying that because it's different than the next manifestation of the power of God in that history. And the next manifestation of the power of God in this period, which I'm saying is number 8, then the sacrifices begin to be offered, and then fire comes down out of heaven and consumes the offering, both with Moses and Solomon. I'm saying that's this history. And here, when the people see that manifestation of the power of God, they are, of course, overwhelmed, but they have a loud cry, a loud shout. And I'm saying that it's a different response here and here. We're now in this history here, where what's being presented to God's people now should be humbling them in the dust but empowering them with the reality that the Lion of the tribe of Judah has been guiding this movement from the very beginning, and he's almost to take it to the very end. Okay, so it should be overwhelming every one of us what we're seeing happening here in my mind. But we're about to give a testimony here that is designed to bring to the attention what's going on to the Nethinims and the Levites. Okay, the Levites are the next target audience. If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. In this history, what's going to go on with the priests in the near future, when this movement begins to be persecuted by the powers of the land, and those Seventh-day Adventists that have been shielded from recognizing this movement and the implications of this message, when they begin to look at the participation with the government authorities that's going on between the government authorities and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Holy Spirit's going to use that to convict them. There's something wrong about this picture, and they're going to wake up to it, and they're going to begin to come in at this point. But there's no way that that history is going to be shielded from the Nethinims. The Nethinims are going to begin being acquainted with that history as well. And we're approaching that history. That's the logic of this. And I have three lines of argument to try to make that case. Is that in the terminology of 2 Chronicles 29, from the first day of the first month until here is 8 days. I'm saying that this is not in proportion, but this is day 8. So from here to here you have 7 days. And it's not proportional, so don't hold me to that. But I'm saying that the Bible teaches us that it didn't take 7 years. This would be the end of 7 years right here, the beginning of day 8. It didn't take 7 years to do the temple. It took 7.5. But it took 7. It says both. The Bible says both. So the temple construction's finished here, but it's finished in here depending on how you look at it. And what I'm saying is it's making sure that it's teaching us that we understand that this work of the temple extends into this history. That's the temple. But the Bible also teaches us that King David ruled in Hebron, and we mark Hebron at 9/11 for 7 years and 7.5 years. So David rules in Hebron for 7 years, but for 7.5 years. This is David, because I'm saying that the Lord here now is restoring not only the religious aspect of the church triumphant, but the civil aspect of the church triumphant. And then I'm saying over here in this history, from the midnight cry to the 10th day of the 7th month, that you have 70 days, and that the Bible teaches us that when Jacob came down into Egypt to join Joseph, that he brought 70 souls total into Egypt to join together. This is the joining of the two sticks in that story. Upon 2 witnesses, it says this in Exodus, it says it in Deuteronomy. But then Stephen says in Acts 7:14 that there was actually 75. So I'm saying that the 75, because the 70 on 2 witnesses covers the history from the midnight cry to the 10th day of the 7th month. But because we have a witness of 75, that this 5 can be 7.5. It takes us back in this history, and it's teaching us that in the story of the joining of the two sticks, which is the story of Jacob coming into Egypt and getting reunited with Joseph, that it's telling us, we already know what happens in this history. This is the history from the midnight cry to the Sunday law of parallel kingdoms. We know it happens here. But I'm saying, based upon Stephen's testimony in Acts 7:14, that this number 75 allows us to see that the first 5 of the 75 is dividing this period of 8 in half and telling us that the testimony that's given right here in the midst of this day is the ensign that begins to awaken the Levites to what's happening. So So I got 3 different 7.5s to put in the temple. One is about the reestablishing of the religious aspect of the church triumphant, one the civil aspect, and the other the joining of the 2 sticks, which are represented by the coming together at this level of the priests and the Levites. Over here, this is old stuff, and I know you can't see it, but I just wanted to speak to it briefly. Sister White says the sealing of Ezekiel 9 is the same as the sealing in Revelation 7. That's in your notes. But we've taught from the very beginning that the vision of Ezekiel 8 and 9, and even on up through chapter 12, it's one vision. So when you take the vision of Ezekiel 8, you have to treat chapter 9 as repeat and enlarge. And chapter 8 is telling you about the people in Jerusalem that are going to bow down and receive the mark of the beast. That's where chapter 8 of Ezekiel ends. It goes through 4 escalating abominations, the image of jealousy, the secret chambers, the weeping of Tammuz, and finally they're bowing down to the sun. I'm saying that's right here. But then I'm saying chapter 9 repeats and enlarges upon that history. So you got to go back here to 9/11, because we've made a good case why Ezekiel 8 begins at 9/11. And Sister White says the sealing of the 144,000 in Revelation 7 is the same as the sealing in Ezekiel 9. So this is the history of the sealing. It's repeated and enlarged. Chapter 8 is telling us about the Adventists that are going to receive the mark of the beast. Chapter 9, those Adventists that are going to receive the seal of God. So I'm just putting in place the judgment of the living begins at 9/11, but it comes in 3 steps. Okay? When you, at 9/11, accept the premise of 9/11, that the mighty angel of Revelation 18 descended at 9/11, and the judgment of the living began, the latter rain began, time to return the old paths, all the prophetic implications of that, then you've just put your name in the Lamb's Book of Life. And there's a record keeping that goes on up until here through this history, and it's part of the judgment of the living. But when you get to 2014, now the 3rd angel has arrived, and he is going to begin investigation to see if your life is in agreement with the covenant that you made with the Lord back here. How you put your name in this book back here. The angels have been recording your activities ever since you put your name in the book back here. Now the record keeping is put in place. The investigation of those records in connection with the lifestyle that you're living, the experience you're having, takes place. And it leads you to midnight, where the executive judgment is about to take place. I might be expressing that. Am I expressing that a little bit off? No? You can live with that one? Okay. So I just wanted us to see that this history here is the history that we're living in. And I may have been around in this history at 9/11. But you may have came into this message even after 2014. But you're still going to go through this, both the testing of these 4 generations, and your name's going to be put in the book. Some records are going to be made about that. And then the record is going to be investigated, and you're going to come to here. But here, executive judgment begins. Okay, and I'm going to acknowledge something, but I'm not going to try to answer it. Brother Philip came up to me when I was sitting up there, and he left the punchline of his presentation out. And when he explained it to me, I thought, that's how I would define it. It was the punchline. But I had him run it by me a couple times, and I'm not prepared to regurgitate it and have confidence that I can do it justice. So I don't know how we're going to fit that in, but it was really nice. It was, you know, he's taken all this university studies on whatever his goal is, to be a physicist or whatever. So when he talks at that level with me, I listen, and maybe I can follow the logic, and I appreciate it. But he had one of those kind of approaches to the difference between the Millerites' ability, the Millerites' applying their time prophecies and what we're doing, and I could see it made sense. It was a very nice distinction between the two. But I just can't spit it out. And I don't even see him in here. So we're going to have to figure out, or you're going to have to go ask him to explain that to you briefly. But he wanted me to put it in place, but I wouldn't have did it justice. So there is... I will get started now on my notes. I don't think that I will get too far. I think I only speak one more time, right? And I'll get through these notes today, Lord willing, in the next presentations. I'll just start trudging through. What I've given you is an overview of where I want to go. And I've tried to also do enough about this, because if I understood Theodore right this morning, this will help him when he gets up here before Parminder's presentation. This might be, is this an okay point of reference, or it had nothing to do with it? Okay, so I've kind of did that also to prepare the way for what he's going to share about the two Italian meetings and this meeting here. So I put on where we closed out last night from Zechariah 13 and Joseph Bates' commentary. I just want to remind us that in Zechariah 13, 3 parts are going to go through the fire, and Bates understood it was Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And I'm arguing that Sardis represents a covenant people that's being passed by in the Millerite history, and it represents a covenant people that's being passed by in our history. If I understood Parminder right yesterday, I think he and I might be approaching this a little bit different. But most times when we seem to be approaching things a little bit different, when we ask each other for clarification, we're on the same page. And the other times, I usually have to be the one doing correcting, so perhaps he's correct. But I'm understanding that in this story of Zechariah 13, that Sardis in the Millerite history is apostate, the Protestants that were God's covenant people. They had a name that they lived, but they were dead. And they're getting passed by. But there's still a purification process that's going on among the Millerites to see which of the Millerites are going to follow on. And that's the story of Laodicea and Philadelphia. So I'm saying, because Millerite history is repeated to the very letter, that this same phenomenon happens in our history. And therefore Sardis in our history would be Laodicean Adventism. It would be the covenant people that have a name that they live, but they're dead. But in this movement, there is, and this is probably the part that he wouldn't have said yesterday this way, and he may not ever say it, but in this movement there's wheat and tares, there's wise and foolish priests, okay? And that's what I'm seeing represented by Laodicea and Philadelphia in this threefold makeup of Zechariah 13 that Joseph Bates has made comment on. But in Zechariah 13, they're brought through the fire and they're purified as silver and gold. And that takes me to Malachi 3, where we went last night, where the messenger of the covenant, Christ, is going to come and purify the sons of Levi as silver and gold. And I'm wanting to put one thing in place there, and it's Matthew 13, 11, and 12. So all I'm doing at this point is refreshing us on where we concluded last night. But if you go to Matthew 13, 11, and 12, I want to argue that this is the dirt brush man. Matthew 13, verse 11 said, "And he answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven." That is not 3. Yes, okay. Good for you. "I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but he that cometh after me is mightier than I, whose shoes I am not worthy to bear. He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire, whose fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and gather his wheat into the garner, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire." I'm saying, of course, this is Christ, but I'm saying in William Miller's dream, this is the dirt brush man. He's the one that's going to sweep the floor. And the reason that I want to put that in place is I'm saying that the people that enter into this work here, the priests that are on the right side of the issue when midnight comes, that are going to be an offering and begin to serve as priests, that they're going to they're going to pray. Let me put it that way. Let me put it in this context so you know where I'm going. When Solomon built David's temple, built his temple, he brought the ark in, then they're going to dedicate the temple. And when the Shekinah glory comes into the temple, everyone has to get out of the temple. It's filled with the glory of God. That's right here. And then in the story, Solomon goes into his famous prayer. And I'm sure you all are familiar with his prayer. And then they begin the offering, and there's another manifestation of the power of God, and fire comes down out of heaven. So what I'm saying is that this history here is the history of 81, as well as other symbols. So when you go to Revelation 8:1, you have the seventh seal, fully opened. And I mean fully opened. I understand the seals to be like when you're taking a Band-Aid off. You know, they begin to be removed, but finally gets to where it's fully off. And in this history, I'm saying the seventh seal is fully removed. And in Revelation 8, where you see that, you're going to see God's people praying. And in answer to the prayer, fire is taken from off the altar, coals, and they're cast down to the earth. And I'm saying that this is this manifestation of the power of God. And that the fire that's being sent down, the easy one to recognize is like the Pentecostal fire. Tongues of fire were on their foreheads. But what I want you to see is that in the story of Solomon, between this manifestation of the power of God and this manifestation of the power of God, you have Solomon's prayer. And in Revelation 8:1, you have prayer, and then the fire is cast down. And in William Miller's dream, which begins in early writing 71, you're going to see 81. You're going to see that William Miller reaches a point of discouragement where he prays and he weeps. Then the dirt brush man comes in and he gathers up the jewels and he casts them into the new casket that's much bigger. Okay, so the dynamics of prayer, casting, manifestation of the power of God, I'm wanting us to understand that those jewels of William Miller's dream are fully restored in this history, and it's corresponding with the dedication of the temple and the beginning of the work of the priest, and it's corresponding to Miller's dream and Revelation 8 verse 1. So I want us to see that Christ is the dirt brush man, and he's the one that cleans out the chaff, okay? And so you have from Desire of Ages in there, and that's the logic, if you couldn't understand it, why I have Miller's Dream as the subtitle to Desire of Ages 392. It says, quoting from Matthew 3:11 and 12, whose fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and gather his wheat into the garner. This was one of the times of purging. By the words of truth, the chaff was being separated from the wheat, because they were too vain and self-righteous to receive reproof, too world-loving to accept a life of humility. Many turned away from Jesus. Many are still doing the same thing. Souls are tested today as were the disciples in the synagogue of Capernaum. When truth is brought home to the heart, they see that their lives are not in accordance with the will of God. They see the need of an entire change in themselves, but they're not willing to take up the self-denying work. Therefore, they are angry. When their sins are discovered, they go away offended, even as the disciples left Jesus murmuring, "This is a hard saying, who can hear it?" I mentioned last night a minor thing. It was cool for me just as a dad, okay? In these meetings here, my son came up and he pointed out to me, probably some of the other ones here saw it as well, but that if I would have had the presidents, when I was doing the presidents, if I would have had the General Conference presidents on top and the presidents of the United States on the bottom, then it would have been pretty easy to see that it was also expressing 2019, not just that there's 20 General Conference presidents and 19 Republican presidents. And it's just cool to see, you know, your son manifesting that aptitude when he haven't seen a great deal of that here in the recent past. But I look at what the Lord is doing here in this message now, and as I'm up here speaking, it pops in my mind the brothers and sisters that have been in the school of the prophets here through the years, or have worked with us in other places, that have that type of aptitude. Not everyone has that type of aptitude. As an example, Theodore has a different aptitude than most of us. Some of us, I know there's some people out here that handle numbers as well as he does, perhaps. But the Lord gives us different gifts, and some of us just have this special gift of being able to recognize not just the patterns, which if we're going to believe Philip, we all have to understand the patterns. That is what understanding is. But some of us got the gift to recognize quickly what this typifies and what that typifies, and pull it all together. And you run across these people, and many of them that have been here and come and gone, you know they had that aptitude. I mean, there's things that I teach here on a regular basis that I learned from some of those guys that now, if they're going to say anything about me, this could be really bad. They have no appreciation for this message or myself or the other people involved. They're just flat enemies to this message. But you knew when they were here they had this aptitude, and you're watching these things unfold, and you're thinking, what's preventing them now from recognizing that the things that are coming together now are the same kind of logic that they used to recognize and be blessed by, and that this logic is so complete from beginning to end? What is it that's preventing them from humbling themselves and said, yeah, I was wrong, I'm gonna get back engaged in this? There's some that have done it in fulfillment of early writings, page 259, where she says some got off the platform to investigate it, but they got back on. There's some in the recent past that have got back on. Amen. I don't know what these... another thing I'm amazed about, I don't watch the web, but I know from friends that do watch the web that most, not some, most of the people that leave this movement and begin warring against it, they continue to watch everything that we do. Not just here, but what Parminder does over there and what Tabo's doing over there. And they're watching it and they're criticizing it. For me, I'm always hoping, boy, if I walk away from this, I don't want to listen to any of it anymore. I just want to go off into darkness and crawl up in a hole and die. Okay, I don't want to be involved with this. But for some reason, they're still watching it. If that doesn't give you a testimony about some kind of warning they should receive by their own activities, I don't know what does. But as they're watching it, what is it that's preventing them from recognizing that the consistency that initially drew them into this understanding is just as consistent now as it ever was, but it is so much more profound now than it was then? I don't know what it is with these brothers and sisters, other than something in their heart. And I'm here to tell you, I don't know of anyone in this room that would have a problem if some of these people that have been 200% enemies, if they humbled themselves and made it right and got back on board. I don't think anyone would protest that. Because it's clear from the prophetic word, whether they're going to see it or not, that they don't have much time to get back on that platform. And I'm telling you what, the reason this subject of time setting got being publicly broadcast is because I gave a testimony in Italy about how I know, and I still know it, there's no one in Adventism over the last 29 years, there's no one that has put more time and effort into opposing application of prophetic time than myself. There just isn't. There's maybe theologians in Adventism that understand it as well as I do, but I was dealing with it weekly. So I bring that into the arena, and then this spurs this opportunity for the Lord to start discussing, well, maybe there is a way that time's going to be part of the message here at the end, and now we realize that it is. I forgot where I was going with that. There was something I was going to tie in with these brethren that are fighting these things, and it just left my old mind. Yeah, but nobody, maybe that was it. They'd have to humble their hearts, right? They'd have to humble their hearts. And it just isn't that hard. It's not that hard. I mean, if you think that you understand this thing so well that you're on the same level as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, you've got a problem. The fact that you're allowed to understand this message, the more you understand it, the more it should make you be humble. The more you understand it, it should be teaching you the least amount that you really know in comparison to Him. So I'm hoping that the brethren can take note that, hey, I've had to humble myself. What would be the problem with that for these guys? I think that's where I was going, but I don't know. Let's get back on track. I want to put another point in about this history here. I'm arguing that, yes, the sealing and the binding at one level are the same thing, but the binding at one level, if you're going to take just that expression, bound or binding, it's talking about being brought into companies, okay? And this typically, for a long time, we would call the binding off. Here, probation closes for the priests, and there's a binding off. And if you're going to use the parable of the wheat and tares, the tares are bound first, then the wheat. But we now understand everyone's bound at the same point in time, and I'm going to say there's a binding off illustrated in this history. But the binding off, I want to say, has to do with being brought into companies, okay, brought into groups. And you can see this, if you understand the binding off is a coming together. This meeting place here, we're being bound together in the bundle of this message, okay? But those people that leave this message and fight against it, they're being bound together into another group. It's amazing. It's amazing. Someone, I won't tell them because then they could clean up their email list, but I got an email from someone that doesn't want to email me anymore at all. If they want to talk about me, they want to do it behind my back. And they evidently had one of these old group lists, and they sent me an internal email, and it had on the header all the people that email was going to. And I showed it to Kathy. It's just amazing how many people that have left this message, that are enemies to this message, that while they were in this message, they could not get along with one another. There's no way they were going to hang out together. But then I get an email, and I know it wasn't on purpose, and it's got all their names on the header, and they've come together. You can tell they've come together into a bundle to fight this message. Okay, so I'm saying the bundling is being brought together into some kind of corporate body, and I want to put that in the record because I'm going to say that happens in this history, and then we'll end it here and turn it over to Theodore and Parminder. Okay, I've already mentioned the sealing of Revelation 9 being the same. That's why I have that up there, is for the quote on page 1 of my notes where it says sealing. The quote from Early Writings, page 118, is a common one here. I then saw the third angel, said my accompanying angel, fearful is his work, awful is his mission. He is the angel that is to select the wheat from the tares and seal or bind the wheat for the heavenly garner. These things should engross the whole mind, the whole attention. Now, I don't intend to read, even if I had time, I did not intend to read these quotes, because they're already in the public record. The first one on the top of page 4 says the sealing time is very short. One of the things that you can note from that is that the sealing is a period of time. It's a short period of time. I'm saying for us it's from 9/11 to midnight as priests. And the seal is something that is also, even though it's a period of time, the seal is something that's impressed at a point in time. So you can mark the sealing time 9/11 to midnight, but there's also an illustration of the seal when it's impressed on you, and I'm saying that's at the Sunday law, or for us, midnight. And you can see the third quote on page 4 from Testimonies, volume 5, the last line, when the decree goes forth and the stamp is impressed. And you have the definition of impressed down there: imprinted, stamped, marked by pressure, compelled to enter public service. So the sealing is a period of time, but there's also an aspect where it's a point in time. And from Manuscript Releases, volume 19, page 99, says, if you would impress upon the wax a clear and vivid impression of the seal, you would not dash the seal upon it in a hasty, violent action, but you would carefully place the seal on the plastic wax and quietly, steadily press it down until it has hardened into the mold. I'm saying that's a point in time, but you can even read a period of time into that if you wish. So the point that I don't intend to read that I was talking about is on page 3. If you look through page 3 through page 5, and when I come back in my last presentation, I'll begin on page 6, you're going to see some passages that are talking about being bound into bundles. And you're going to see I hopefully see the justification for me saying that the binding is coming into bundles. But on the first quote, I'm going to give you just a little bit of commentary on the last minute and a half. The first quote on page 3, Experience and Views, page 7. You read it to see the logic about being bound into bundles or companies. But that last line, it's saying the people, the wicked, the tares, however you want to define them, the main reason that they get bound into the bundles on the wrong side of the issue is in that last paragraph. It says, I saw that the Lord had given the world opportunity to discover the snare. This one thing was evidence enough for a Christian if there was no other. If there was anything that would wake you up, it's this last sentence. There is no difference made between the precious and the vile. If you have two groups to choose from, if there's one group that cannot see the distinction between the precious and the vile, you don't want to be in that group. The group you want to be in is the group that can see the distinction between the wheat and the tares. Okay, so that's just one thought in here. But now the next quote is Early Writings, page 240 to 242, and it's talking about companies being bound together. And I want you to see the binding time that she's talking about. And that first paragraph on the bottom, I have the message that's doing this. I heard the voice of an angel cry, fear God and give Him glory, for the hour of His judgment is come. And you'll see in the next paragraph, she's going to quote that again. What is the message that's binding people into the bundles for the heavenly garner? In this context, it's the first angel's message. And what's the first angel's message? It's a message that is identifying when judgment, executive judgment, is going to arrive. Is that not what the Millerites were identifying? That they were wrong as the event, to the event and what it was. They thought it was the Lord returning to the earth, second coming. But they were pronouncing that the executive judgment was going to arrive on October 22nd, 1844. Sister White's writing this after the fact. She's saying that this message, the first angel's message, is what's going to bind us into bundles for the heavenly garner. And the message that does it is the message that includes a pronouncement of when judgment is going to take place. You follow my logic there? And then in the next paragraph, same passage. In that time period, she's also saying that the righteous are to be looking at the unrighteous. I don't know if they'd be looking at the unrighteous, but their message is, come out of there and touch not the unclean thing. Okay, so now the next quote from Review and Herald, August 18th, you read it, it's about bundles, and it's putting it from 9/11 onward because it's the third angel's message, and it's referencing the third angel when the earth is lightened with its glory and shines to all nations. You can see that in the boldface. And then Brother Pippenger was referring to this next quote on page 5 a couple times yesterday. I'm out of time, but I'll at least give you just a little bit of commentary and stop. Early Writings 271, 272, the shaking is taking place when the Laodicean message is present truth, and the Laodicean message becomes present truth at 9/11, because 9/11's been typified by 1888, and Sister White says Jones and Wagner's message was the Laodicean message. So when you get to 9/11, you got the Laodicean message in place, and this is where the shaking begins. And the people that are on the right side of the issue, on page 3, you're going to see that their protection is going to be doubled. Right in the history that we see the doubling, their protection is doubled. And then in paragraph 5, one of the hard statements about this history that's in this very passage is paragraph 5 on page 5 says, I heard those clothed with armor speak forth the truth with great power. It had effect. Many had been bound, some wives by their husband and some children by their parents. We're moving into a time period like it's never been. This is where families get parted, because this part of the family is going to go get bound in that bundle, and the other part of the family is going to get bound in that bundle. Serious times. Okay. I guess I've set up the logic I needed to set up for myself and maybe a little bit for Theodore. Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the Sabbath. We thank you that we can draw away from the worldly interests that sometimes occupy our thoughts and consider your thoughts after you. We are overwhelmed but amazed at the light that you're opening up to your people. We ask that you grant us the willingness and ability to take this light into our minds and our hearts in the way that you intend that it might accomplish its purpose. We thank you for the work that you've been doing with this movement since 1989, and we thank you that you're now bringing it to a position to where it is actually going to become a white horse that goes forth to conquer and to conquer. We ask that you'd allow us to be part of that work, and ask that your Holy Spirit would give us direction on what we have to overcome in our lives to participate in that. Thank you for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.